When Elliot Granger inherited his grandmother's house, he thought it was just another creaky old Victorian relic, the kind of home people whispered about, but no one wanted to live in. He'd always loved visiting her as a child, though. The smell of cinnamon tea, the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, and her endless collection of antique paintings that seemed to fill every wall. After she passed, the house, and everything in it, became his. It took him nearly a month to sort through her things. Most of it went into storage: porcelain figures, old lace curtains, furniture that looked better than it felt. But there was one item he couldn't part with: a large framed portrait that had always hung above her fireplace. It was of a woman he didn't recognize. Pale skin, auburn hair pinned back, a blue dress with lace around the collar. Her expression was calm but uneasy. Her eyes seemed fixed on something far away, yet somehow they always found him. He remembered asking his grandmother about it once when he was small. She'd smiled and said she was painted by an artist who captured souls instead of faces. At the time, he thought she was joking. The portrait was the last thing he took from the house before selling it. He hung it in his new apartment above the couch, where the morning light hit it perfectly. It gave the place a sense of old-world character, something he thought might impress visitors. For the first few days, he didn't notice anything strange, but by the end of the first week, he started to feel watched. When he sat at his desk working, the woman's gaze seemed to follow him. When he left the room, he could swear she was still staring from the corner of his eye. Once, while watching TV, he looked up and felt an odd chill. Her expression looked slightly different. The corners of her mouth weren't as soft. Her eyes seemed wider. He brushed it off as imagination. But that night, when he walked through the living room to get a drink, he stopped. The woman's eyes weren't just following him. They were facing him directly. He turned on the lamp and leaned in. No, he was imagining it. The painting couldn't move. Still, he found himself whispering, "Good night." And though he would never admit it, he swore the faintest smile appeared on her face before he turned away. A few nights later, he woke at 3:14 a.m. His apartment was quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator. But something was off, the faint sense of being watched again. He got up, padded into the living room, and stopped dead. The portrait was crooked, tilted, as if someone had tried to take it down. He straightened it carefully, staring at the woman's face in the dim light. Her pupils seemed larger than before, too dark, too deep. He turned away. And then a soft sound, like fabric stretching. When he looked back, the woman's eyes were rolled upward, gazing toward the ceiling. He stumbled backward, blinking, thinking maybe the light was playing tricks. But when he turned the lamp fully on, the eyes were back to normal. He didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, he called his friend Clara, who owned a small antique shop. When she came by, she stared at the portrait for a long time. "This is beautiful," she said, "but there's something odd about the pigment. It's not oil, it's organic." "Organic?" he asked. She frowned. "It looks like the artist mixed something into the paint. I've seen this once before, in restoration work. They used to blend tiny amounts of blood for richness of tone." He laughed nervously. "You're joking." She didn't smile. That night, Elliot locked the door to the living room. He wanted distance between himself and that painting. But at 3 a.m., the sound of the door handle turning woke him. He froze in bed, listening. Then came a soft creak, wood against weight. Footsteps. Slow, barefoot. He sat up, staring at the darkness of his hallway. The air was cold, too cold. He heard something brush against the wall, then the faint scrape of canvas. When he turned on the lamp, the footsteps stopped. He waited until morning, then forced himself into the living room. The portrait was off the wall. It was resting against the couch face down. When he lifted it, he gasped. On the back of the canvas were fingerprints, smudges of something dark, oily and red. Fresh. He decided to get rid of it. He called Clara, asked if she could take it to her shop for evaluation. She agreed, though she sounded uneasy. He loaded it into his car that afternoon and dropped it off at her store. That night he slept for the first time in weeks, but at 3:14 a.m. his phone rang. It was Clara. Her voice was shaking. "Elliot, the painting, you didn't tell me she..." Static, then a crash, then silence. He drove straight to the shop. The lights were on, door ajar. Inside, shelves were knocked over, glass shattered, and on the floor near the counter, Clara's body. Her eyes were open, staring upward, a look of terror frozen on her face. The portrait lay beside her, upright this time, the woman's mouth slightly open, as though screaming. The police ruled Clara's death a heart attack, no signs of struggle. But when they took the painting into evidence, one of the officers swore later that the woman's expression changed between photographs. He said the corners of her lips curled upward when no one was looking. A week later, the police returned the painting to Elliot. He told them to keep it. They said they couldn't. No claim of ownership meant it went back to him. He left it in the hallway face down and covered it with a sheet. That night, he heard knocking from the inside of the frame. 3 slow knocks. He pressed his ear against the covered painting, trembling. From the other side, a whisper. "You looked away." He threw it into the storage unit across town, locked the door, never went back. But sometimes when he dreams, he still sees her. The same pale face, the same blue dress. Only now she's closer, her eyes inches from his. And every time he wakes, his curtains are open, and his bedroom mirror reflects a shape standing behind him. A faint silhouette with auburn hair and eyes that never blink. When Elaine Porter took the job as assistant curator at the Ashcombe Museum of Fine Arts, she thought she was finally escaping the chaos of modern galleries, influencers taking selfies, art that looked like clutter, and endless noise. Ashcombe was quiet, historic, the kind of place where whispers echoed through marbled halls, and the smell of old varnish clung to every corridor. Her job was simple: catalog new acquisitions for the private European collection exhibit. One of those pieces, a massive dust-covered oil painting recently arrived from an estate sale in Prague, would change everything. It was titled "The Family at Dusk," no artist name, no signature. Just a faint inscription on the back of the canvas. To see them move, one must truly look. The painting showed a Victorian family seated at a dinner table, father, mother, and 2 children. They were perfectly still, eyes solemn, their pale hands folded in unnatural precision. But something about those hands unsettled her. The angles were wrong, the fingers slightly too long, the joints bending subtly inward. The painting was scheduled for restoration, so Elaine spent hours under dim yellow lights, gently dusting the surface. As she worked, she noticed tiny cracks in the paint that almost resembled veins beneath skin. When she leaned closer, she swore she saw faint pink tones shimmering beneath the varnish, like blood under flesh. She laughed it off. Long hours, poor lighting, imagination. But that night when she locked up, she walked past the gallery again. Through the glass, the painting looked different. The family's hands were no longer folded. The mother's hand was resting on the table now, fingers splayed. The father's were slightly raised, mid-motion, as if about to grasp something unseen. She blinked, stepped closer. The light flickered once and the hands were folded again. Elaine tried to tell her boss, Mr. Hollis, about it the next morning. He laughed, saying she must be seeing the brushstrokes change under varnish refraction. But the more she studied it, the more it changed. Over the next few days, she began photographing the painting at different hours. And when she compared the photos, her stomach dropped. In one, the boy's hands were gripping his silverware. In another, the girl's fingers were clutching her dress. And in the last, taken just before closing, the father's hand rested on the edge of the frame, reaching outward. The next morning, she found a single fingerprint on the inside of the display glass. It was small, like a child's, and pressed from the inside out. She reported it again, but Hollis brushed her off. "Art has a way of deceiving the eye," he said. But that night, she decided to stay late and prove him wrong. At 2 a.m., the museum was silent except for the distant hum of air vents. Elaine sat across from the painting, flashlight in hand, waiting. Minutes turned to hours. Her eyes grew heavy. And then, a movement. She caught it. The father's hand twitched. Just slightly, a single deliberate flex of the fingers. Her heart raced. She stood up, the flashlight trembling in her hand. The beam caught something wet glinting along the edge of the canvas. When she leaned closer, she realized the paint was fresh. The father's handprint, smeared down the lower frame, still dripping red. Elaine stumbled backward and fled the gallery, locking the doors behind her. But when she came back with Hollis in the morning, the painting looked normal again. No wet paint, no handprint. Except for one thing. The father's chair was empty. They searched everywhere. Even removed the frame to see if someone had tampered with it. Nothing. But that night, the museum's motion sensors triggered an alarm. Security footage showed a faint shadow walking across the gallery floor. Tall, thin, pausing by each display case before vanishing behind the family at dusk. Elaine became obsessed. She began researching the painting's origins, tracing it back to a Czech painter named Adam Vesely, a recluse rumored to have practiced a form of spirit binding, painting portraits using pigments mixed with human ashes. His final work was said to have consumed him, quite literally. He vanished before completing the family at dusk. The unfinished canvas was found in his locked studio, still wet, the chairs empty, and now the father's chair was missing in hers. 2 days later, another painting arrived from the same shipment, one that had been overlooked before. When they uncrated it, Elaine froze. It was the same family, same room, only now the father was standing behind them. His face had changed, gray, expressionless, and his hand was pressed against the inside of the canvas, palm first, as if against glass. She refused to stay late anymore, but that didn't stop it. Her apartment lights flickered whenever she looked at the wall. Sometimes she'd wake in the middle of the night to find fingerprints on her mirror, long, streaked, almost dragging downward. When she wiped them away, they'd reappear hours later, as if pressed from the other side. The night before the new exhibition, she found Mr. Hollis in the gallery staring at the painting. He didn't turn when she spoke. "Elaine," he whispered, voice trembling. "Their hands... Look." Every figure in the painting was now gripping the table, their fingers digging into the wood grain, knuckles strained. And in the bottom corner, a new hand had appeared. Small, pale female. Her hand. She stumbled back. That wasn't there. He turned to face her, his eyes wide. "You shouldn't have looked at them so long." Before she could respond, the lights cut out. Pitch black. In the silence, she heard the faint sound of fabric stretching. Then a single whisper. "Sit." When the lights flickered back on, the gallery was empty. The painting now showed 5 people. The father, mother, 2 children, and a woman seated at the far right. Her expression frozen in terror, her name tag still pinned to her blouse. When the museum reopened the next morning, security guards noticed something unusual about the family at dusk. There were wet fingerprints smeared along the bottom of the frame, and a small bloody streak trailing from the painting to the hallway door. The motion camera caught nothing, except for one frame. A blurred handprint pressed against the inside of the glass, moving downward until it disappeared. Ashcombe Museum closed that wing permanently. The painting remains sealed in storage to this day. But workers who walk past that section after dark still report hearing faint sounds. The creak of a chair, the scratch of nails against canvas, and sometimes, a whisper. To see them move, one must truly look. He was born in 1891 in Vienna, a quiet, solitary man with eyes that always seemed to stare past whoever spoke to him. He'd been called a genius, a prodigy, even a visionary. But after his final exhibition, they called him something else. The painter of the departed. Every person Raphael painted died within 7 days of sitting for him, and the paintings themselves seemed to evolve. Small changes appeared over time, colors darkening, skin fading, eyes hollowing. Some even claimed they saw faint movements in the brushwork, like the subjects were still alive, trapped inside. When Margaret Lenz, an art historian, stumbled upon his forgotten portfolio in a dusty attic of a Viennese archive, she thought she'd made the discovery of a lifetime. There were 7 canvases, each sealed under cracked sheets of glass. She didn't notice the faint burn marks on the corners of the wooden frames, or the fact that every sitter's date of death was written precisely 7 days after the signature. Her colleagues warned her. Raphael Dorn was a myth, they said, a cautionary tale for romantic artists. But Margaret didn't believe in curses. She believed in evidence. So she arranged an exhibition, The Faces of Eternity. 5 portraits from the Dorn collection, displayed for the first time in nearly a century. On the first day of setup, she noticed something odd about the paintings. The subject's eyes, though centuries old, still gleamed. There was depth to them, the kind of glossy wetness no oil pigment should retain after decades. And the longer she stared, the more it felt like they were staring back. The electrician, an older man named Thomas, refused to stay in the gallery alone. He said the air around the paintings hummed like a faint vibration under his skin. Margaret laughed it off until that night. She was cataloging notes when she realized one of the portraits, a woman in black lace, had changed. The faint smile she remembered painting notes about earlier was gone. Now her mouth was slightly open as if mid-breath. Margaret stepped closer. The eyes looked different too. No longer passive, they were focused, direct. At the bottom corner of the canvas, the date of death had shifted. She'd written 1896. Now it read 2025. Her hand trembled as she reached out. The varnish was still warm. By the next day, Thomas didn't show up for work. The security team said he'd collapsed in his apartment overnight. No cause found. Margaret tried not to think about the coincidence. But that evening, when she returned to check her notes, she found a 6th painting in the storage room, one she hadn't logged. It was a half-finished portrait, the same style, the same color palette, but the sitter's face was incomplete. Only the eyes were detailed, staring directly forward. And below the unfinished strokes, etched in crimson, was her own name. She froze. It couldn't be real. She called the night guard, Kurt, to check the manifest. He said no one had entered storage all day. When he went to look himself, he found only 5 paintings. The unfinished one was gone. That night, the cameras caught something. At 2:43 a.m., motion sensors triggered in the gallery. The footage showed faint shapes, like moving shadows cast by candlelight. But there were no candles and the room was sealed. Then, for one frame, the woman in the black lace dress, the one who had changed, blinked. The security system crashed immediately afterward. When Margaret came in the next morning, the gallery lights flickered. Every portrait now had the same small alteration. Each subject's gaze had shifted slightly to the left, all pointing toward the empty wall beside them. She walked over to it and found a single blank canvas propped up against the plaster. Still wet, still smelling of turpentine. And in the center, faint outlines were forming, a brushstroke of hair, the shape of a shoulder. Hers. By now, her colleagues were worried. Margaret hadn't slept in days. Her eyes were red, her voice shaking. She claimed she heard whispering when the lights were off, the sound of brushes moving on canvas. They told her to take a break, but she refused. Instead, she did what any historian would do. She documented everything. She recorded a video log in the gallery that evening, speaking directly to the camera. "This is Margaret Lenz," she said. "It's been 6 nights since the discovery. I believe Raphael Dorn's paintings are self-sustaining works, perhaps chemically active, or worse." She turned the camera toward the paintings. All 5 now faced forward again, their expressions darker. Behind her, the blank canvas was fully painted. The image on it, unmistakable. Margaret, seated at her desk, looking over her shoulder. her face pale, her eyes empty. She didn't see it. The camera did. When the video was found a week later, it ended abruptly. Margaret was mid-sentence describing a faint figure moving between the frames. Then came a loud scrape, and a flash of motion, a hand reaching out from the side of the canvas toward her. The footage ended there. When police entered the gallery, all the paintings were gone. Every wall was empty except for one. A single portrait remained. It showed a woman in modern clothing, sitting in a chair under dim light. Her eyes were wide, her mouth slightly open, as if calling for help. Her name tag read, Dr. Margaret Lenz, curator. Ashcombe Museum closed indefinitely after the investigation. The video evidence was sealed, the paintings never recovered. But collectors across Europe began whispering again about Raphael Dorn, the painter of The Departed. A century-old rumor resurfaced. Dorn had once said that he never chose his subjects, they chose him. And that his final masterpiece, unfinished at the time of his death, would one day complete itself, when it found its next sitter. So if you ever come across a painting in an antique shop, unsigned with eyes that seem to move, don't stare for too long, because the legend says the brush still moves when it's watched, and every new admirer becomes the next portrait. When Henry and Laura Whitmore bought the old Pembroke house on the outskirts of Yorkshire, they thought they'd found a dream home. A sprawling 19th century estate with ivy on the walls, creaking floorboards, and windows that looked out over endless moors. It was quiet, private, and filled with the kind of character new houses never have. The agent had warned them the place came with a few quirks: loose pipes, stiff doors, the occasional draft. But neither of them expected the attic. It was sealed shut with rusted nails. When Henry finally pried it open on their third week there, dust poured down like ash. The air that came out was cold, unnaturally cold. And buried beneath an old trunk and a broken rocking horse, they found it, a rolled-up canvas tied with twine and stained dark along the edges. Laura thought it was junk. Henry thought it might be valuable. When they unrolled it, the smell hit first. The stench of damp wood and something faintly metallic, like iron and decay. Then the image emerged. It was a painting of a room. Not a portrait, not a landscape. Just a dimly lit room with a single chair facing away from the viewer. The details were exquisite, almost photographic. You could see the faint outline of wallpaper, a curtain half drawn, even dust on the wooden floorboards. But what made them pause was the color of the chair. It was the same deep green velvet as the one in their own living room downstairs. They hung it up anyway. It seemed to fit the tone of the old house, eerie but elegant. The first few days, nothing strange happened. Then one evening, Laura noticed something. She was reading by the fire when her eyes drifted up toward the painting. For a moment, she thought she saw something reflected in the window within the painting. A faint human shape, like a silhouette, standing just outside the frame. When she blinked, it was gone. She told Henry, but he brushed it off. Old paint, he said. Cracks catch the light weird. But over the next week, the figure began to appear more clearly. At first, just a faint outline near the window in the painting. Then a shoulder, a head, and finally, a face. A pale woman with hollow eyes, standing inside the painted room facing the chair. Laura became obsessed. She spent hours staring at it, tracing the brushstrokes, trying to figure out how the artist created such depth. Henry started sleeping downstairs because the sight of it made his skin crawl. And every morning, the painting looked slightly different. Once, the chair was turned slightly to the side. Another day, the curtain was half open. And one night, they woke to the sound of dripping, a slow, rhythmic tap echoing through the living room. They found red streaks running down the wall beneath the painting. It looked like paint, but smelled like blood. Henry wanted to take it down. But when he tried, the nails wouldn't budge. They'd fused into the wall somehow, like the frame had grown roots. That's when he noticed something else. The wallpaper in the painting matched theirs exactly. Every detail, even the tear in the corner near their fireplace. Except now there was something new in the painting. A door on the far wall that didn't exist in their real living room. The next night, Laura woke to the sound of footsteps above her. The attic. Henry wasn't in bed. She called his name, but there was no answer, just the soft creak of floorboards overhead. She grabbed the flashlight and climbed the stairs. The attic hatch was open, ladder pulled down. Inside, the air was freezing. The beam of her flashlight shook as she scanned the room. Cobwebs, dust, the smell of mildew, and then a movement. In the corner, something shifted beneath a sheet. She approached slowly and pulled it away. Underneath was another painting, smaller this time, but fresh. The oils still glistened. It was the same room again, but now the chair was empty. The woman who'd stood in the background was gone. Laura turned to leave and froze, because on the floor beside the painting was Henry's wedding ring. She ran downstairs, screaming his name. The house was silent, except for the faint hum, like the vibration of stretched canvas. When she turned toward the painting on the wall, her heart stopped. There in the chair was Henry. Not in flesh, but painted, perfectly. His face pale, his eyes wide, his hand resting on the armrest, just as he used to sit when watching TV. Only one difference: a faint streak of red dripping from his wrist. She tried tearing the painting from the wall, clawing at the frame until her hands bled, but it wouldn't move. And as she screamed his name, the figure in the painting blinked. By morning, the painting was dry again, the chair empty once more. The woman was back, standing beside it, her hand resting on the back of the chair, her face calm and distant. Laura was never seen again. When the house was later repossessed, the realtor found the attic sealed shut again, nails rusted tight. But this time there were two paintings rolled up in the corner. One showed the same room, the same chair, the same faint glow from the window. The other showed a woman standing beside it, her face unmistakably Laura's. And beneath the second painting, written in crimson across the canvas frame, were 5 words. "It's your room now, too." The old Pembroke house remains unsold to this day. Every potential buyer says the same thing, that the walls feel too alive. And anyone who stays long enough claims they hear faint footsteps above them at night, followed by the soft whisper of brush on canvas, painting someone new. Some say art imitates life, but sometimes it remembers death. In a small town outside Manchester stood the Belmere Gallery, a 2-story brick building that had been closed for nearly 2 decades. Locals whispered that it was cursed, that after the fire of 1989, no one dared reopen it. 5 people had died that night. 5 artists whose final exhibition was never officially unveiled. No one ever figured out how the fire started. The fire marshal's report listed spontaneous ignition from unknown cause. But the few survivors said something else, that the paintings themselves had burned first. Decades later, Lydia Crane, a young curator for the Manchester Museum of Modern Arts, stumbled across the Belmere archives while cataloging forgotten collections. Inside a sealed crate were 5 paintings labeled simply, "The last exhibit and private collection, do not display." Each was wrapped in black cloth and tied with wire. The labels bore only dates and the initials of the original artists, all 5 of whom had died the night of the fire. Lydia was fascinated. To her, these weren't cursed artifacts. They were history waiting to be rediscovered. She arranged to have the collection restored and displayed for a one-night-only event. The Lost Works of Belmere. Her colleagues joked that she was tempting fate. She smiled and said, "It's art, not witchcraft." But that was before she saw the paintings. The first was titled Ashes of the Heart. A woman kneeling before a burning piano, her face obscured by smoke. When Lydia leaned closer, she swore she saw faint movement, a flicker in the flames like something inside them was still alive. The second eternal supper showed a dinner table with 5 empty chairs. Each plate was filled, but the food looked rotted. And along the wall behind the table, the faint outline of shadows lingered, like people once sitting there had been erased, but their impressions remained. The third, the smoke between us, was more abstract, swirling black strokes forming the suggestion of faces inside the haze. Lydia's assistant, Daniel, joked that one of them looked like her. When she glanced again, the brushwork had subtly changed. Now the faint outline of a woman's face in the corner did resemble her. By the time she uncovered the fourth and fifth, the temperature in the room had dropped nearly 10 degrees. Her hands shook as she read the titles. The Breath Before Burning, The Ones Who Remain. On the night of the exhibition, the small gallery filled with critics, donors, and artists. Candles lined the marble floor. The air smelled faintly of linseed oil and old wood. Everyone admired the painting's detail, their unsettling beauty. No one noticed the faint smoke drifting from the edges of the frames. Lydia was giving her opening speech when one of the guests screamed. The canvas of Ashes of the Heart was bleeding color, red streaks running down like wet paint, forming patterns that looked eerily like veins. Then another guest pointed. The woman in the painting had moved. Her head was now tilted toward the crowd, her hair smoldering at the tips. Before Lydia could react, the gallery lights flickered, the air filled with the sharp electric scent of ozone and burning oil. The fire alarms blared, but no smoke appeared. Instead, the paintings began to glow. Every canvas pulsed with a faint amber light, like embers hidden beneath their surfaces. And then, one by one, the figures inside them began to breathe. Witnesses would later claim they saw faces pressed against the inside of the paintings, hands pushing outward, glass warping from heat that wasn't there. Daniel tried to tear Eternal Supper off the wall. The moment he touched it, the lights exploded. He collapsed, convulsing, smoke rising from his skin as if he'd been struck by lightning. Lydia dragged him out as the gallery filled with a roaring sound. Not fire, not wind, but a chorus of voices, whispering, crying, and laughing all at once. Every light bulb shattered, the candles melted instantly, and in the brief flash of darkness before she fainted, Lydia swore she saw the 5 figures from the painting step out of their frames, their skin charred black and eyes glowing white. She woke up in the hospital 3 days later. The Belmere Gallery was gone, reduced to ash. No trace of the paintings remained, no sign of Daniel's body. When investigators sifted through the wreckage, they found something impossible. All the walls and floors were burned clean, except for 5 perfect rectangles of untouched wood, exactly where the paintings had hung. In the center of the gallery floor, written in black soot, was a single phrase: "We finished what you started." Months later, Lydia received a plain package with no return address. Inside was a charred photograph, the Belmere Gallery on the night of the fire. 5 silhouettes stood in front of the building, each holding a burning canvas. And behind them, barely visible through the smoke, was a 6th shadow, taller, thinner, with a shape that looked almost familiar. On the back of the photo, written in faint handwriting, were the same words as before: "The Ones Who Remain." At first, she thought it was a cruel joke, until she noticed the reflection in the glass frame beside her bed. One of the figures from Ashes of the Heart standing just behind her, its face half-burned, its mouth whispering soundlessly. When she turned, the room was empty, but the smell of smoke lingered. Lydia quit her job and moved to a different city, but it didn't help. Everywhere she went, she saw reflections: store windows, elevator doors, television screens that caught her face and someone else's. a blackened silhouette standing over her shoulder. And sometimes when she closes her eyes, she can still hear the faint crackle of flames and the whisper of a brush dragging across canvas. No one ever reopened Belmere Gallery, but 2 years later, fire investigators returning to the site found something new. In the center of the burned foundation lay a single untouched frame, and inside it a painting. It showed the ruins of the gallery, moonlight falling across the ashes. In the foreground stood a woman, pale, trembling, holding a torch. Her name tag read, Lydia Crane, Curator. And below it, in blackened paint that glistened wet under the light, were 5 words. The gallery that burned itself. Some say the painting still moves, that if you stare long enough, the faint flicker of fire begins again, and the woman inside slowly turns her head, looking directly at whoever's watching. And if you stay long enough to see her eyes, you won't wake up when the flames start again. If you made it this far, thank you for spending your night with us. If these stories gave you chills, there's plenty more waiting. Don't forget to subscribe to Night Fear Stories for new terrifying tales every single night. Sleep well, if you can.